Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. We have a music news episode of the All Ambient podcast coming at you. Just recently, there was a release of a new generative AI platform from none other than Google that we'll talk a little bit more about in just a bit. But Mr. Jacob Collier wound up helping Google out and even wound up doing a demo on this platform for a couple hours just recently. There is a link to that video in the show notes. So if you want to take a look at what this particular tool does, that might be a great way to dig into it. Might aid you tracking with this conversation today, but we're going to go a little bit more 50,000 foot view on using generative AI within the process of music production. It's not a new subject to us, but exploring it from really where is the line of asking AI to generate everything for you versus asking it to help you get some creative ideas going with instruments and combinations that would not normally be humanly possible. It's an interesting conversation. Let's not wait any longer. Digging right in starts right now. Here we are, folks. Welcome to a music news episode of the All Ambient podcast. Kirk, hello. Marsh, hello. Ben, hello. Good to see you guys.
Hello, hello.
Heyo. Hello there.
So, some interesting developments over in the land of Google. We're going to open up the conversation of AI in the music world again. This is kind of an interesting little development. So, Google has been working on a new generative AI platform, and it's been talked about for a while, but now it looks like they've partnered up with none other than Jacob Collier. And we all know the illustrious, prolific, and just wildly talented musician, artist, composer, Jacob Collier. He has been working hand in hand with Google. From the looks of it, it looks like some of it was maybe just more user experience and interface and how it looks and all that. But really at the heart of it, to be able to bring this unique generative AI music tool to the world is something that he's helping platform. I am equal parts curious, and also it's not a doomsday conversation. It's not oh man, this is going to replace everything. But I do want to just kind of talk about this. So the idea of this, and Jacob is talking about it, he really likes the idea of just, kind of going for whatever itch he wants to scratch. And he was talking about gearing this MusicFX DJ towards the user flow state of asking, quote, "What am I dreaming up today?" Collier says that question has always inspired his workflow. So then having this is sort of giving access to a flow of sorts. So once you're in that flow, you're off, you're going. So MusicFX DJ can accept multiple prompts. So you can say, hey, I want a djembe, I want a Finnish pan flute, I want an 808, and I want them all to kind of be mixed together and to, the unique properties of each to just, generate something. You basically throw in these multiple prompts with the ability to fine tune how much emphasis each prompt has on the final continuous stream. So it's essentially just generating a musical stream of sorts. If you go, and I'll put in the show notes, I'll put the link to Collier. He was just messing around for a couple hours inside of it. You can sit and watch the couple hours if you would like, but I was just bouncing around all the different, so I like listening to him talk. He's great, but for the sake of time, I was just bouncing around listening to some of the different generative prompts and watching him play around with like the chaos module and the things like that. I thought it was really cool. I like the idea that it presents and that you're able to do things that, you can just dream up and then poof, there it goes. But I think my real question is that it gets me to think about, we've talked recently about Suno and Udio and how, the lawsuits continuing to go on, and yet those companies are not going away. Those products are not going away. In fact, Timbaland, I believe, just started partnering with Suno and helping bring their whole thing to life, and he's really excited about it, which to me says that that's the opposite of they're ready to close shop and say this is too much of a headache. They're saying, no, this is the future, and here we go. So the conversation's not done, but I I see this thing from Google, this generative, the MusicFX DJ, as kind of the next step, somewhere in the spectrum of I do absolutely everything myself to I literally type in a prompt and it prints me a fully finished song. This is somewhere in between. And I am personally asking myself the question, and so I want to talk about it as a group, where is the line where all of a sudden AI becomes not just a tool that helps you or, that catalyzes your creative process, but it all of a sudden becomes the very thing that does the lion's share of the work for you. And then you are just, printing a couple files or you're adding a couple things and off you go. It's a unique question. I don't think that we are the arbiters of truth on this, but I'm wrestling with it and I wanted to hear what you guys had to say about it too. So yeah, just off the cuff, anything you guys want to chuck at this interesting little piece of news. And certainly in the show notes, make sure before you dig too deep into this conversation, and honestly, if you guys want to even just stop for a minute and kind of bounce around and listen to some stuff, feel free to. But for the listeners, please just cruise a little bit of the video and just kind of familiarize yourself with the sort of thing that MusicFX DJ does. That would be super helpful to the conversation for you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just curious what you guys think on any part of that.
In my imagination, when just hearing you talk, it made me think about even the process of collaboration, because that's essentially what you're doing with this thing is you're collaborating with this thing. You're giving it ideas, it's doing things, you're reacting to it. And so I would say that the line is when your emotions have nothing to do with the final product, then it's kind of like, why are you doing this anyways? Maybe because I guess you're enjoying it, but then if you're enjoying it, then your emotions are a part of the process. Sure. So for example, if someone has created a work and they've made all these things, and maybe I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did something? And then they did something and they sent it to me and it's all done, but maybe I adjust a level, or maybe I do a delay throw, or maybe I EQ out something, but I'm making those decisions, or I highlight something, I turn something up that I thought was cool, but I'm doing that because it brings me a certain emotion when this sound gets turned down and this sound gets turned up. I had nothing to do with creating those sounds other than saying, hey, I like what you do. Would you send me some stuff? And then I mix it, but I'm mixing it from an emotional standpoint. I think whether you're doing that with people or you're doing that with an algorithm, if you're letting your emotions, it's the emotion. If you are trying to react to something with an idea, then that's something. And if you're reacting to it with an emotion, that's something else. And I think if you take away the idea, which in this case might be a prompt, and then you're not using any emotional feeling to bring it across the finish line, if you're not doing those two things, then I don't know what you're doing. Yeah. And if you are doing those two things, then I think there's a pretty wide range of where you can take things and enjoy the process of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I am all for happy accidents. I am all for just trying random things and just seeing what happens. I wouldn't want someone listening to think that just, you attach the word AI to some piece and that all of a sudden we're like, no, scary. I mean, really, the spectrum is so, I think we've talked about this in a prior conversation with the four of us before, but the idea of even presets on early keyboards are essentially like one of the, pretty far down the spectrum, but it's essentially like an assistive sort of technology that says, hey, I'm going to bend all the circuitry into a way that has, whether we're talking wavetable or we're talking, analog or whatever, bends the circuitry in a way that produces a sound that is very different than if you were to click this other button. And so, you could technically have gotten there yourself if you were to turn a whole bunch of knobs and all that. But with the push of a button, a preset gives you a giant shortcut to get there. And there are probably plenty of people who use presets that would not know how to arrive at that preset if they were told that they had to recreate it themselves by going after the way that they're, shaping the ADSR, the way that they're, playing around with, the LFO. It is just all the different pieces. And again, I'm just talking synth stuff at this point. We could talk anything. The spectrum is wide on assistive technology in music. I'm not pish-poshing any of it. I just want to keep exploring it. Just kind of exactly what you were saying, Kirk. Where is there a line where if you pass the baton off, further over that way that you have farmed out too much, or is there a way to farm out too much? And clearly there is. I think the emotive line, what you were talking about, where if we just become disconnected from it as humans. But, at the same time, maybe one could argue that if you were just creating, this goes back to our content conversation a while ago, but like music as content, and you're just kind of turning out like, okay, here's some corporate stuff to be used as content for a licensing play, which isn't a bad thing, but you're not like personally like really, really excited about a piece that you happen to be playing or happen to be performing. I think and that's a different journey. That's not like an artist journey. That is I'm able to create music, and I'm able to perhaps earn a living doing so. But I'm a little more curious in the kind of the artistic integrity side of things. Like, hey, this is me versus this is a prompt. And anyway, I'm fairly lost in my head on this whole thing. I need you guys to help me sort it out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I also watched part of that video earlier in the week, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised. Like, I think you all know I'm not the biggest proponent of AI music stuff. Yeah. I'm not a fan of the Suno Udios of this world. I think they're gimmicks in many senses, but they create, decent results, but without really any kind of emotional input. When it comes to this, I felt like, okay, here is something, and now taking copyright stuff out aside, here's something I feel like I could see myself using in a workflow. I could see myself spending 10, 15 minutes, because you can essentially use it as a sampler. You can download the output of what it's doing. And hey, you put in a whole bunch of interesting stuff, and it could generate you an interesting beat that you then kind of take into your session and mess around with, interesting sounds that you could then sample and create your own instrument based on. Like, I will use Splice, not all the time, but on a fairly regular basis, just to be like, hey, here's something interesting, drag that in, mess around with it completely. It doesn't sound like what it originally sounded like, but it's just something different that I wouldn't necessarily have just come up with based on either the samples I have on my computer or like a synth or whatever. So I feel like in that sense, I kind of like it. Some of the examples on Jacob Collier's video were cool because it can do very random stuff, which doesn't just sound like it's copying a real human. It's like something really, I think there's that chaos thing, and you're like, oh, it's kind of super random, but you're like, oh, okay, this little sound it's created almost by accident is cool. I could see that here, or, So I'm all for using AI or any kind of like different stuff that I'm used to having in front of me as just inputs into a compositional process. And I don't know. I don't think I have much more to say than that, but being open to that kind of experimentation, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah. I agree with what Ben is saying too. And it makes me think of, a lot of times in the past, if I'm doing more, like we've all done the kind of licensing or, use the royalty free term and all that kind of stuff. Like I remember when I would be working on stuff and I would kind of like question myself if I was using like arcade, right? Like output arcade. Cause even if I was just like a, percussive element or, but you go in there and you press a key and it gives you just this whole chord progression, right? Sure, yeah. And you're free to make songs with that and put them on Spotify if you want. So to me, if I was to try and find, is there some kind of line there or something that I feel okay with or I don't, like for me personally, it's kind of in the realm of doing something like Ben is saying where, I'm using this tool, but I'm not taking the thing from arcade and printing it and just releasing that as my track. I'm using it as a tool to then modify sounds or sample it or do whatever. And I watched a little bit of the video with Jacob. I didn't get to watch a whole lot. I saw some very interesting, very random sounding things that what context is that usable in? I don't know, like more power to you if you can use that.
Well, and he's the king of, I'm going to do a whole bunch of random things. He's the guy who was like, let me just make a new guitar that is tuned completely different than any other guitar. Oh, and I'm going to make it 5-string instead of 6. And he lives on his own planet.
Literally, way. I think I was like, I'm scrolling through the video and I'm just ding, ding, ding. And I think I click whatever, like 20 minutes in and it's him just in front of the mic, just like going blah, 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 blah. just like, I'm like, okay, cool. Like we're getting into it. But I think there's an interesting conversation of just maybe the genre that we're in too, of just making ambient music. Like, what could you do with a tool like that within the scope of like what we're doing specifically, where there's not, necessarily firm song structure and firm, melodies every time. Like, I think there's a whole nother conversation there of just what the music we make kind of involves, just sculpting wise and sonically, all those aspects where you can do kind of some really interesting things when you maybe play around with tools like this differently. So
yeah,
I'm intrigued.
I know things will continue to evolve for sure. Right now, I mean, with all of us being in the world of in the box recording, and don't get me wrong, we record plenty of instruments and vocals and all that stuff, but to also access, things that are from sample libraries and stuff like that, that we are bending into the way that we want them to be and all that, playing our own chords and melodies and all that. I have so many people who wind up like emailing me, or you're, like sending a quick social message, like, man, love your stuff. Like, what plugins are you using? Or like, what's your favorite pad that you play, or things like that. And man, it just like, for whatever reason, that just wells up a whole bunch of emotion in me, and not in a, like, I need to guard my secrets kind of, because none of us have secrets. Kirk, I mean, you famously on your course were just like, hey, I use this stuff in the vast majority of my productions and they turn out great. And so here's how you build it from the ground up. Like, I love that. So not hiding secrets or anything, but what I fear is that when we are just told, hey, go buy this and use that plugin and do that thing, that we are no longer involved in training our ear or you just exploring the territory of really finding, not just finding something that we like and finding something that we identify with and the emotion behind that, but also kind of knowing how to sculpt it and how to, here's what I like, but I want to shave a little off here and I want to add something there. I want to stretch it out. I want to curtail it a bit to really kind of create a thing that sounds like you and that it's malleable in the way that you want it to be. I think that's the thing that kind of hurts me a little bit when I hear questions like that. And so what I usually try to say is, hey, there are a handful of different plugins or different presets or things that I use, but then there's also a whole myriad of, techniques and production stuff that I do to wind up affecting it. And then it has a lot to do with how it's interacting with the other instruments in the particular piece. And so, the whole world of generative and the world of, just pulling something off the shelf and just using it like that, I am not gonna fault somebody who wants to get a leg, or again, just to catalyze a composition, Marshall, like with Arcade. I have Arcade as well. I play around in it and it's fun, but there does come that time where you got to ask yourself, like, and maybe it's always back to the 50,000 foot view that I usually go to, where it's like, why do I want to put music out in the first place? Like, what is the point of me putting this thing together? And I think a lot of it is because for me, just for an answer to that question, to be like, because I thoroughly, love music. I love creating it. I love, like in the genre that we're in, to be able to compose and manipulate sound and to, create these things to the degree where I feel like I have something unique to say in that space is a big reason why. It's not, if there was a machine that said, I can spit you out the next Dear Gravity track in 4 seconds and it sounds exactly like how you would want it to, I don't even know if I would go there, because the process and the actual journey of it, I think is one of the big reasons why I keep showing up, right? What I'm trying to say is maybe I'm not on this journey to like, I need to fast track my whole approach to artistry. Like, cool, I did that last EP and it took me this many hours. You know what would be really great is if I could chop that in half this next time. I want to get it done in this amount of time. And man, so what can I do to shortcut? Like, it's not an efficiency equation, right? And so it does go back to that emotion conversation, Kirk, that you were saying early on, and just how we are interacting with what we're creating. And it's gonna be a different response, I think, for probably each generation and what that looks like. But, we are of the generation that came up with having tools, very few tools like this, period, if any. And now to watch it, start to swarm the industry. I think about my kids. I think about my 12-year-old, my 9-year-old, and my 7-year-old, and the fact that this is readily available to them. The moment a couple of them have even started kind of playing around with production stuff, like this could be a day one tool for them if they so wanted it to be, which is an interesting thing to think about. Like, if you have never known composition or production without that as a possibility, as a tool in your belt. That's a very unique thing. Yeah. Anyway, just again, more postulating, more picking around at whatever's going on.
I think that was part of their hope too, was that it would be kind of like a gateway drug for people to be like, oh, like, wait, I can come up with ideas and then get this response of like this thing, and it lights me up. Like, wow, okay, so what if I want to learn how to play the piano, or like, man, I want to learn how to play guitar, or I would love to do this, you know?
Interesting, yeah.
So there could, you know, I could see that as a really positive thing, to where you get this kind of visceral reaction of your idea and music comes back to you. You're like, oh, I like that feeling. So, you know, if it did that, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But as long as it didn't become the thing where you feel dependent on this thing to be able to do anything, which I think is kind of like, that's the preset danger, where presets are great. There's lots of our favorite songs that are actually started from presets, you know, that we didn't realize they were just the first one to put it out. And then you go, you open up your Korg, you know, and you're like, oh dang it, that Billie Jean sound, or, you know, whatever, you know, that Gorillaz song, you know, it's all presets, you know, so there's something
there's
of
another
like,
moniker name right there, man. Preset danger. Why are we not just printing these left and right, man?
So it's like at some point you have to kind of wean yourself off the presets, just because a lot of times it's more enjoyable, and a lot of times it's faster to just make your sound, build your own sound library, or, you know, you kind of have your ingredients that you like to cook with. It's more enjoyable, you know, to where you don't have to spend 20 minutes scrolling through presets, you know, and you just get to cooking, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that goes to what you were saying, Mike. I mean, I think we all probably get emails and messages from people saying, hey, what's this sound?
Yes.
What effects do you use? That kind of stuff.
Sure of it. Yeah.
And I like to reply and kind of give some details, but maybe not the whole thing, because part of it for me is, if I give that to someone else, it's not necessarily going to be helping them create their own music and their own sound, their own style. And I think that's the most important thing, because those effects and those sounds only really work for me because they're the ones that I've created and I know inside out, and I kind of just know how that then makes the sound that I want to create. Give them to someone else and they won't necessarily do the same thing. They'll it won't achieve what they want to achieve, which is something coherent and nice and spacious or whatever. And I feel like the encouragement has to be, hey, go out there, mess around with sounds wherever those inputs are coming from. Mess around with sounds. Find your own language of synths, of sound libraries, of effects that are kind of you and define your sound. And then you work from that, but you have that basis of sound. Then you bring in a few other experimental elements and unexpected things. And for me, kind of tying this up a little bit, I feel like that's where these kind of AI tools could play a role. You've got your basis, you've got your sound library that you go to. And then you're like, hey, I messed around with, I forget the name of this particular one, but I messed around with this AI tool. It spat out this kind of interesting little loop or this interesting synth thing. And I'm like dropping it in, reversing it, adding these effects. And oh, that's kind of interesting. I wouldn't have had that as part of my arsenal with just what I have on my computer, but it kind of brings it into that world. So that's kind of how I'm seeing this. And I'm hoping that more of that kind of stuff will appear almost as a replacement or something which would work alongside an alternative to Splice or to, all of those style programs. So that's kind of where my head's at with it, at least.
I love that. Yeah, for someone to develop the language of sound for themselves. I think that's how you said it. Maybe I believe you probably said it even more eloquently than that, but yeah, that's the thing. That's the journey for sure. Well, it's a unique space to pay attention to. I do not want to keep revisiting AI in the sense that it's something that we're all scared of. And it's like, oh, we got to keep tabs on what the new kids in town are doing. And I don't want them on my porch. You know, like, that is not the conversation. It is very true, though, that things are evolving and that I do want to be aware of what is happening in a way that does promote creative health and that allows for us and for any creator, you know, if whatever their medium is, to be able to further do what they do. And if there are tools that can allow them to go that route, that's great. But yeah, it is interesting when just the line between generate me an entire song versus, hey, an instrument that I don't necessarily have access to, but I've got kind of this idea and I just want to scratch that itch. And yeah, it will be very unique to see what we have access to. The day where one is able to punch in, like, I want to be able to hear the sound of an upright piano in the Hollywood Bowl with the reverb, space of playing it outdoor, like the Parthenon. To do something like that, it's like, I want this particular, and again, like right now you could buy a particular, convolution reverb, and you could buy a particular piano. Like you can do some of that and just kind of piecemeal it all together. But the day will come when you can just type in a prompt and say, like, I want to play my nylon string guitar, 4,000 feet above the earth, and for it to, just what the outer spaceness. Well, again, I'm just pulling things out of nowhere, but it's an interesting development. And I think, well, again, when you tout the line of things going straight to generate me the whole song, I think there will be some interesting things that we will be able to generate that lend themselves to creating even more cool things and maybe even expanding our voices. So who knows? Awesome. Well, let's keep our head up and keep on making great things, and let's see what comes next. So grateful for you guys.
Yes, sir.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.